Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Biology Bios. My name is Jim Edelman. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at the University of Memphis. And my purpose with this podcast is really twofold. First, I want to let folks know that most Thursdays during the semester, we have talks by visiting researchers at 4 p.m. in Ellington Hall. And that's folks from all over the country and world talking about the really cool biological research that they do. The second purpose is to have those folks here learn a little bit more about them, how they got where they are, and what really excites them about the research they do. In addition, I'd like to say a quick disclaimer that I borrowed these questions from Rhett Miller's excellent podcast called Wheels Off, so please check that out as well. But without further ado, let's get to this week's guest. Thanks so much for being here. Dr. Cissy Ballen, thank you so much for being here and welcome to Biology Bios.
Thanks for having me.
So I generally like to start things off with asking people to broad brushstrokes describe their research interests, who you are, where you are, what you do.
Sure. So my name is Cissy Ballen, as you said. I'm an associate professor at Auburn University in the Department of Biological Sciences, and I conduct biology education research.
Excellent. So within the realm of biology education research, well, actually, I think I'll ask this in two parts. Like within that realm,
Sure.
like what's kind of like your more subfield of that? Like where do you specify within that umbrella?
Sure. So a lot of work in the lab, we really focus on teaching strategies that are student-centered and that strive to humanize biology. So really promote and kind of embrace the human element of biology, the fact that biology is done in this human context, and promote, inclusive and engaging teaching strategies that benefit all students.
Excellent. So then diving a little bit deeper, what is a particular project or maybe two that you've been doing recently that you're especially excited about, and why do those get you excited about your work?
Yeah, right now I've been really fascinated by this idea that, students come up through higher education, and there are 1,000 different trajectories that a student could pursue after they graduate. And we know it's been well documented that one of the factors that have a really large impact on students' decisions are the role models that they've encountered in their life in academia that have had these kind of outsized impacts on them.
Sure.
And so, we know that role models are important. It's super well documented that role models are important. And a lot of my research right now kind of focuses more on what is the secret sauce of role models? Why are they important? How are they important? And so, we're following a framework by a few psychologists, Gladstone and Simpian, that really makes these predictions. Role models are important because they are relatable, because their success seems attainable to students, and because they exude competence. And what's cool about having this framework is that, okay, we can actually test those features. And so what we've been doing is we've developed these large networks of faculty who teach biology, who are interested and excited about integrating relatable scientist role models into their curriculum. And we've been working with them. And so, over several semesters, we'll expose students to certain elements of role models. For example, portraying their success as more or less attainable. And then we can have students engaging in these activities that feature role models. We have these blurbs about the role models as well. And then we can see how that impacts students' perception of the role models, perceptions of their own, capacities and interests in science and biology, their performance and engagement on a particular task, like the activity that they're doing. And so by doing that, we really are taking these experimental approaches to understanding how role models work, kind of figuring out like why and how are they relevant and effective for students.
Yeah. Um, so I was going to jump in with a thought on that, like extending that,
Yeah.
but I think I'm going to ask you because one of my guests a couple times ago suggested that I add a question that was like, um, I mean, his like cynical like shorthand for it was like, so what good is this? But that's not what he really meant. He meant like, what's the broader impact of this? Because I think on the one level, this is super cool, just kind of like the psychology of mentors, of role models, like that. Like it's
Totally.
just the fundamental, how do people work? How do we think about other people? But then like, what's the extension of that? Like the conclusion of your work, how does that have broader impacts is not exactly, you know what I mean?
I totally know what you mean. And that's actually like such a wonderful and spot on question because, when I started this work, I had just started as an assistant professor. I was at Auburn, sort of like nervously shuffling papers around my empty desk, thinking, what can I pursue? I don't have a lab yet. I don't have postdocs, grad students. And something that I did, the first thing I did when I got here was we did a textbook analysis of the most commonly used textbooks,
Okay.
biology textbooks by the largest universities in the US. And so I was working just with an undergrad, who was doing a lot of we were looking for scientist names in textbooks
Yeah.
because my question was, who are the scientists that are currently portrayed in textbooks? And do they reflect not only like the demographic diversity of the US, but also the demographic diversity of the biology students to whom these textbooks cater, right? And, not surprisingly, we found that the scientists who are portrayed in textbooks tend to be older white men. And so, and then there are a few other interesting things we found, like throughout all of the textbooks that we studied, there was not a single Black woman scientist featured in a textbook.
Hmm.
And, scientists are mentioned, we found, gosh, there were several hundred scientists mentioned per textbooks, which means students are encountering a potential scientist role model every few pages that they're reading in a textbook.
Yeah.
And so that sort of motivated this research, like it motivated this idea that, people might want to be including more relatable scientists, who are contemporary, who reflect the wonderful diversity of students in their classrooms.
Yeah.
And so we teamed up with these awesome resources called Data Nuggets, who they generate activities that are using authentic data from scientists.
Cool.
And then Project Biodiversify, which specifically highlights scientists with excluded identities. And we teamed up with them to generate materials that so students can, kind of like grapple with authentic data in these introductory biology courses, and the scientists who are generating those data.
That's awesome. So Data
Yeah,
Nuggets is the
yeah,
group?
yeah. And to make it a little more confusing, they're combined. We call the resource Dataversify. And
Okay.
so, and that's kind of ongoing work, or this is a large grant that was just wrapped up, but now we're pursuing a similar, we're hitting some of those other theorized aspects of role models that are important, and
Yeah.
conducting similar work with that resource. So it's pretty cool anyway, but I hope that gets at your question, the
No,
relevance of
definitely.
this. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think there's, I'm coming at it from my perspective of being a professor now. I just had the person that taught me intro bio on the podcast like last week, and he's this lovely person, has been a role model for years and years.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to you talk and I'm thinking there are also wonderful like specific nuggets for people in our positions that like you can present yourself in any array of ways, right? Because we're all, we're multifaceted, right?
Of
But
course.
you can present yourself and what you do as more attainable or less attainable, right?
Yes. And that's kind of one of the takeaways as well is, to whatever extent instructors are able and comfortable. I always say, humanize yourself in the classroom. You're not this, larger than life scientist. You're also just a person. And that's changed how I've taught biology as well.
Yeah, no, I, my wife and I are currently teaching the second semester of intro bio for the first time. And so I think we're very human because the students realize that we haven't done this stuff in like 20 years or so. And so we're just like, hey man, we're learning right there with you. Like, I think it makes you, whether we intend to or not, it's made us very human.
Yeah. And that's one of the first things I tell students, and I teach a part of the introductory series is, biology was actually a class that I was really challenged by in as an undergraduate. And so, I think that kind of dispels the myth that you have to be brilliant to pass these large, weed out introductory classes.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think that's great.
That's actually a pretty good transition to the next question, which is, was there a specific time when you knew you wanted to be a scientist? Or was this a slow burn? Was it an aha moment?
Yeah, gosh. I don't come from a family of scientists. And so, but I really always was interested in science. When I went to an undergrad at University of Minnesota, and I was taking several classes. The intro classes were really, really tough for me. But once I kind of persisted through them and took some upper level science classes, in particular zoology, a lot of the taxonomy classes, animal diversity classes, I really liked, and I found to really enjoy. And that's sort of actually when I encountered someone who asked that I then become an undergraduate teaching assistant for the class, which is an awesome program at University of Minnesota. Shout out to University of Minnesota. And she asked that I be a teaching assistant, and then that kind of led to other things. But it also led to this kind of proximity with this individual. This is Sahoya Kotner, currently at University of Bergen, lovely person. And she and I, she was primarily teaching at the time, and she asked if I wanted to participate in some research she was doing in the classroom. And this is sort of before people were doing discipline-based education research, which is what I do. It was before this kind of subfield was formalized and you had tenure track faculty embedded within biology departments doing biology education research. But anyway, I was like, okay, I'll do this research. Let's do it. And that was kind of my first publication. I was an undergrad and, I was just a flunky. I'm sure I didn't contribute intellectually much to the project.
I mean,
but it was a wonderful experience. And, I kind of kept that in the back of my mind when I went on to do a traditional, evolutionary biology PhD. I studied lizards at University of Sydney. And then, when I was nearing the end of my PhD and considering, what do I do next? There were several opportunities to do this sort of biology education research in the context of evolutionary biology or biology departments. And so that's when I thought, I've done this before. I can forefront this experience and maybe get my foot in the door in this cool new field.
Yeah.
And so, after kind of going back and forth, I jumped back into biology education as a postdoc and never looked back.
Excellent. Okay, so this is a total right turn.
No, it's totally fine.
So, in our field, in science in general, we get a lot of there's a lot of criticism, a lot of feedback, not all of it positive. And that comes from the outside, but I, for one, certainly generate my own internal negative feedback and second guess this or think, I'm not smart enough to do that thing. And so I'm always curious about how people deal with that voice that pops up. And maybe you're one of the people that doesn't have that voice and you're just like, yeah, I rock. Which awesome. Good for you. But if like me, you have that voice, how do you how do you silence it? How do you, or maybe make it work for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, this is a funny question because it was just the other day I was on, the National Science Foundation website. I was looking for some status of something. And I realized, you can see all the grants you submitted. And I've submitted a lot of grants and a lot of them have been rejected. So many of them that I have to now officially, as of like yesterday, advance to the next page to see, all mostly unsuccessful submissions. And so even if it's not an internal voice, there are also some
Yeah.
subtle reminders,
Yeah.
out there as you're living your life. Anyway, so it's a great question. And, I'm really fortunate to have like a wonderful research team and support network. You know, all of any of the success I've had is because I work with so many, frankly, more talented people. And so, beyond this immediate research team, I like family, friends, these folks that really are help me get excited and kind of buoy me when I need that.
Hmm.
And then, like, yeah, when I experience failures, when I have this voice in my head thinking like, oh, don't forget about that time several weeks ago where you said that dumb thing, or whatever,
Yeah. Yeah.
I still have like this network that makes me feel okay.
Yeah.
My husband is also an academic. You mentioned your partner is an academic. And so, we also really help each other kind of process obstacles, navigate challenges. But I mean, to really answer your question, like the real answer to your question is not something I would necessarily recommend to most people. And that is, I have two small children. And I simply don't have time to, to dwell. I get bad news and I still have to,
Yeah.
go home and, you know, change somebody's diaper.
Well, I
And
mean, that's a perspective thing, right? That like, okay, all setbacks in science aside, like you're responsible for a very small human. Like that kind of has to come above.
and that essentially means I can't dwell on negativity. I can't
Hmm.
really dwell much on success either, because there are still these monsters I have to chase after when I get home, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's not a privilege or burden, depending on your perspective, that all people have. And
Right.
I recognize that. And so, for those folks, I think it's just so important to have a network of people who are positive and enthusiastic for
Yeah.
you, you
Yeah,
know?
absolutely. And I think, your kids fit into that, right? That's just another node in that network, right? Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
totally.
Um, okay, so we kind of talked about your path. But kind of thinking on that and the challenges that you faced, if you met a undergrad version of yourself working in today's world of biology, um, what advice would you give that person?
Can I ask about this person?
Sure.
Are they interested in pursuing an academic career? Are they interested in pursuing graduate school?
Well, now I'm going to mix it with me, and
Yes.
say, they don't know. They're not real sure. They like this research thing. They like
Yeah.
critters. Yeah.
Yeah. What sort of advice would I give them? Um, I would, I would, I would advise that they do something that makes them happy, that seems effortless to them. For some folks, even coming into my group or other people's group, they've decided they wanted to pursue a path in academia, and they get to academia and they realize this is really hard. I don't like coming to work. I hate Mondays. It's it's hard. It's just hard. Whereas for me, I've definitely felt that. But then when I entered biology education research, for example, it suddenly became something that felt effortless. Not all aspects of my job are that way. Oh my goodness,
Right.
that's not
Right.
the case. But I do think that, you know, if research is something that they enjoy, that makes them happy, um, they should pursue that. And the other advice I would have is to, be present, make themselves, take up opportunities to interact with graduate students and faculty who would be their future colleagues,
Hmm.
because I think this is something I think a lot about because my husband and I, we host a weekly, what's called B Hour. It's a social hour. It's at the B Lab at Auburn.
Oh, I know the
And
B Lab.
oh, really? Yeah, there's two B Labs, so I'm not sure, but
Well,
at one of the B Labs.
I know the one out. Well, I know B Lab Road because that's where the aviaries are that Jeff Hill and
That's
Wendy
right.
Hood work at.
Also awesome people. And yeah, in that kind of area.
Okay.
Uh, so we have these social hours. We encourage folks to come out. And I think the value of that is that people are able to interact with one another. And this kind of hidden curriculum of higher education is revealed through those interactions.
Interesting.
If, particularly if this hypothetical undergraduate is interested in the program at your institution, they'll know if the graduate students are happy. They'll know if what the postdocs and faculty are doing on a daily basis. You know, this idea of, the hidden curriculum. This is something that's used a lot in the undergraduate education literature. But this idea that these unstated norms and expectations that students need to know to succeed or just navigate the academic landscape, a lot of that is revealed when
Yeah.
you interact with people who are doing what you aspire to do. And so I guess in terms of like tangible advice, that's what I would really recommend is, talk to people who have the job that you are interested in also pursuing. I think that is always very revealing.
That's fantastic advice. Yeah, that's really good. I think recently I spoke with somebody about, we don't, in our classes, we don't say, okay, so here's what you do to get into grad school. That's not a part of intro bio. That's a thing that comes from those conversations that you just mentioned. And it's
Yeah.
something that, we could do a better job of actually putting formally into our into our actual curriculum. And we should. But also, yeah, your advice is awesome because that adds another aspect to it. Not just like, okay, email professors that you're interested in. Yes. And like, here's what it looks like. Wow, this person's
Yeah.
talking about that they were in the field all of Sunday chasing butterflies. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah. Or this person was stuck at their computer all day, trying to figure out one line of code in R and
Yeah.
that's also the reality of a,
Yeah.
grad student, postdoc, faculty life.
And for some of us weirdos, that actually sounds awesome. I love figuring out that line of code. It's so great.
Yeah, sign me up.
um, okay, so you've already mentioned your kids, but and that's definitely taken a lot of your time. But I do want to ask, like, what other things do you do? What do you do enjoy when you're not doing science?
Oh gosh. You know, I I'm an avid runner. I enjoy spending time with my kids. Um, I I spend a lot of time, cooking, wandering. We love traveling. My husband is Panamanian American, and so we spend a lot of time in Panama.
Oh, lovely.
Um, yeah, and so, but right now, to be totally honest, we have a 1 year old and a 3 year old. So I feel like there are aspects of my former life where I had lots of more interesting hobbies that are currently lost, and you know what? That's okay because
There's chapters, right? I mean, this is a chapter about a 1 and a 3-year-old, and there'll be another
yes,
chapter that'll be different and interesting.
yes, Absolutely. So I'll have to come back on the podcast in a few years
Excellent.
and
That
be
sounds
like, oh
awesome.
my
Oh, that
gosh,
would be so fun to do these check-ins with people that would be really cool. So, all right, it's been 5 years. What's up?
yeah, an old hobby of mine, which I haven't had time to do in ages, so I was the first teaching assistant for this class at University of Minnesota. That's called the Evolution and Biology of Sex. And it was a super cool class. And so during that time, I took up this hobby of exclusively embroidering animals mating on t-shirts. And so like my mom and dad got snails mating, there was, octopuses, there was beetles.
Nice.
Um, and so like, I swear I used to have some really cool hobbies that I've
That's
had to give
fun.
up
Oh,
in
I
recent
love that
years.
though. Yeah, I mean, I I knew an entomologist decades ago now who had made a poster that was called Bug Love, and it was just all posters of insects mating, or all pictures of insect mating. Yeah,
Oh my
yeah, we
gosh.
biologists are weird. We think about animal sex a lot, don't we?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no. It's good times.
um, okay, so last question. I'm gonna flip it completely around to you and ask, are there what questions do you wish I would have asked you that I haven't?
Oh my gosh, but you covered so much of life.
Yeah, we ranged pretty widely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think you nailed it. I'm glad that uh I'm glad you didn't ask me several questions, about the state of the world and so on and so
Uh,
forth.
yeah, we
Um,
can probably save that for offline.
we can save that for offline. Um, no, I think you nailed it.
Awesome. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure. I am really looking forward to your visit, and yeah, thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you for taking the time. Thanks for the thoughtful questions.
Thanks so much to our guest this week, Dr. Cissy Ballen. You can catch her talk on Thursday, April 10th at 4 p.m. in Ellington Hall. Thanks so much for being here and hope to see you there.